Okay, I think we can get started. Welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us for our Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act webinar series. Last month, we had the theme of traffic safety, and this month's theme is water infrastructure. I'll provide some very brief framing remarks, and I know a few folks will still trickle in as we go through the program. My name is Preeti Thungaraj. I'm the Policy Advisor on Energy and Environment in the Governor's Office. I'm glad to see everybody online here. So New Jersey expects to see about $1 billion from IIJA to improve drinking water and wastewater infrastructure. The investment represents the single largest federal investment in water in the United States' history. And our speakers will dive into some of the details here, but the priorities of the money include, number one, targeting resources to disadvantaged communities, number two, getting rid of lead pipes, and number three, addressing PFAS and other emerging contaminants, For all of our attendees, the chat will be open during today's entire session. So feel free to drop in any questions at any point during the conversations. We're going to have a short Q&A at the end of today's session. So please, and we'll pull from the chat questions. So please make sure to provide your inputs there. So thanks again for joining. I'm going to pass the mic to Assistant Commissioner Pat Gardner, who serves as the Assistant Commissioner of Water Resources Management. She oversees the divisions of water monitoring and standards, water quality, water supply and geoscience, and water enforcement at the Department of Environmental Protection. So Pat, I'll turn it over to you and we can dive right in.
Good morning. Actually, my name is Paul Houck. Pat's having a little technical difficulty starting out the presentation. Do we have the slides showing yet, or can we?
David, can you pull up the slides, please?
Great. All right. Maybe go to the next slide. There we go. All right. Today we just want to cover the overview and basics of the IIJA, or the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law funding, and some ARPA funding that was provided to the department in this fiscal year as well. We'll go over the State Revolving Fund program, the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, and the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. We'll go over the water bank application process, and also provide some information on technical assistance that the department's going to provide to communities to better be able to access these funds. Then we'll have a quick question and answer session at the end. These are today's presenters. Pat Gardner is the Water Resource Management Assistant Commissioner. Christine Ash is from EPA Region 2. Myself, Paul Houck, I'm a Bureau Chief in the Division of Water Quality, and I work in the Water Bank program. We also have Kristen Tedesco, a Bureau Chief in the Safe Drinking Water program, and Charles Jenkins, also with the Division of Water Quality. Next slide. Just a basic background on the Water Resource Management Program. It's responsible for monitoring and regulating the waters of the state of New Jersey. We established the water quality and drinking water standards for New Jersey. We monitor the waters to ensure all standards are met, and we regulate discharges of wastewater and stormwater through permitting. And under Water Resource Management is the New Jersey Water Bank, which is a partnership between the DEP and the New Jersey Infrastructure Bank to provide low-cost financing for planning, design, construction, and implementation of projects. We do that through the administration of the Clean Water State Revolving Fund and the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. These funds are capitalized with federal dollars. The state provides a certain match each year, and the program self-perpetuates with repayments every year from previous loans. And it's designed to provide water infrastructure funding at low cost to municipalities in perpetuity. These programs were established under the Federal Clean Water Act and Safe Drinking Water Acts. Just a little history of the water bank. It's been operating since 1987 and started with the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. And in the last 35 years, we've provided over $8.1 billion in low interest loans to water systems. And these loans have resulted in savings of over $2.9 billion to ratepayers and taxpayers, mostly through zero interest loans, but also through principal forgiveness, which is grant-like funding that doesn't have to be repaid. On average, a borrower will save approximately $500,000 for every $1 million borrowed in interest expenses. These projects have created over 140,000 direct construction jobs throughout the state, and we financed over 1,700 projects. Currently, the Water Bank is financing $1.3 billion in short-term loans to 205 projects that are under active construction. Next slide. All right, now I'd like to introduce Christine Ash, who's going to go over the bipartisan infrastructure law and how it affects states nationwide.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, great. So, hi everyone. Thank you for having me. As Paul mentioned, my name is Christine Ash, and I am the supervisor for the Drinking Water and Municipal Infrastructure branch in EPA Region 2. My branch manages the New Jersey as well as the New York State Revolving Fund, or SRF programs, including the new SRF programs under the Infrastructure Improvements and Jobs Act, often referred to as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law or Bill. My colleague, Mike Shaw, who leads our New Jersey SRF team, is in attendance as well today. We are very pleased to be with you and our New Jersey colleagues today. New Jersey and EPA are working as a team to help New Jersey's municipalities enhance water infrastructure. And today I'm going to share a broad overview of the bill and SRF. Next slide, please. So the bill was signed by President Biden on November 15th, 2021. As it was mentioned, the bill is a historic investment in key programs and initiatives implemented by the EPA to build safer, healthier, and cleaner communities. This is a unique moment in time for EPA. We are getting an unprecedented infusion of resources for programs under the bill, a once-in-a-generation investment that will create millions of jobs and modernize our infrastructure. These are also very important times for advancing justice and equity. The key implementation priorities of the bill include increasing investment in disadvantaged communities, making rapid progress on lead service line replacement, addressing PFAS and emerging contaminants, and cultivating domestic manufacturing, among other things. The bill includes $50 billion to the EPA to strengthen the nation's drinking water and wastewater systems. This is the single largest investment in water that the federal government has ever made. Approximately $43.4 billion of this funding will be funneled through the existing Clean Water and Drinking Water State Revolving Fund programs. Now, the table to the right here summarizes the new bill SRF programs and the amounts that will be made available to states over the next 5 years. And if you click, you'll see, I just wanted to note that there's $5 billion circled on the table, that if you click on the slide, a circle will pop up. That'll, I think, not, or if you try to advance to the next slide, sorry. There we go. So I circled here is a pot of funds that are not through the SRF program, but I wanted to include it since it is funding available to address emerging contaminants with a focus on PFAS in drinking water. Next slide, please. So I mentioned that the majority of bill funds are available through the SRF programs. Now, the purpose of the SRFs are to provide government assistance that is intended to reduce the cost of critical public health and environmental infrastructure. Water infrastructure investment is a critical investment in our future. Water supports health, environmental progress, and economic vitality. The SRFs are federal state programs, so our partnership with New Jersey is essential to the program's success. The Clean Water SRF, and when I say clean water, that's EPA speak for wastewater, provides funding and financing to wastewater and stormwater systems for a wide range of infrastructure projects, and the Drinking Water SRF provides funding and financing to public water systems for a wide range of drinking water infrastructure projects and activities. Next slide, please. So there are different roles and responsibilities that implement and support the SRF programs to make them successful. The EPA sends the money appropriated annually by Congress to each state's SRF programs. This is called a capitalization grant. EPA also provides the grant terms and conditions, guidance, and program oversight. The states design their SRF programs to reflect the needs of their states and authorizations given to them by Congress. They accept applications, score and rank projects, and select projects for funding. Usually, states must match 20% of EPA's annual contribution, but the match for the bill SRF programs has been reduced or removed to make it easier for the state to access these federal funds. Also, American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA funds, may be used to meet the non-federal match requirements of the SRF programs. This provides states additional flexibility to meet match requirements included in the bill. Now, communities, or in other words, municipalities, can and should be involved in the state's SRF public review process, understand program eligibilities, and apply for funding from the state SRF programs. Next slide, please. So Clean Water SRF funds under the bill include additional funding for Clean Water SRF eligible projects, some of which is specific to addressing emerging contaminants, including PFAS. Bill also created a new eligible use of the Clean Water SRF, a 2% technical assistance reserve. These states may provide up to 2% of this funding to nonprofit organizations or state, regional, interstate, or municipal entities to provide technical assistance to rural, small, and tribal publicly owned treatment works. Next slide, please. The drinking water SRF funds under the bill include additional funding for drinking water SRF eligible projects, some of which is specific to addressing emerging contaminants in drinking water and to identifying and removing lead service lines. Funds for emerging contaminants are focused on PFAS. However, any contaminant that has appeared on any Safe Drinking Water Act's Unregulated Contaminant Monitoring Rule, or UCMR, contaminant candidate list is eligible. Next slide, please. So in closing, I just wanted to share some additional information on how communities can help us implement the bill. I think the technical assistance bullet is an important one. EPA should be able to provide some direct technical assistance to communities under the bill and is also working to coordinate some technical assistance efforts with the states. More information on that should be available soon. And next slide. So here's some links to additional information at various websites, as well as my email address if you have any follow-up questions. Thanks again. And with that, I'll hand it back to NJDEP.
Thank you, Christine. Move on to the next slide. This slide just points out the benefits of coming to the water bank for a loan. Our terms are up to 30 years, or the useful life of the project. We have rolling applications, and all our applications are received online at the H2 Loans website. And not only is it an easy interface to submit applications, but there's also phone numbers and actual live human beings who can answer your questions and walk you through the process. We do offer financing for planning design costs. We award loans based on your readiness to proceed. So when you're ready to start construction, we'll close on your loan so funds are available. On the drinking water side, there is also a readiness and a project ranking criteria for loan awards. But with the infusion of funds that we've received this year, our fundable range on the drinking water side is very large. So unless you're at the bottom of the list, you should be able to proceed whenever you're ready. We offer low interest loans during construction, and that minor interest cost could be capitalized in your long-term loan. There are no out-of-pocket costs in the sense that when you receive a bill from your contractor, you can submit it to us for reimbursement, and we get the funds back to you within 14 days in time to pay your contractor. Next slide. This slide just points out the eligible recipients and project types on the clean water side. The vast majority of our borrowers are local government units, municipalities, MUAs, county MUAs. We do have the ability to lend to private entities if there's a public agency supporting the project. That's usually done for brownfields type projects where we're funding the water quality cleanup or benefit of the project. We do not provide funding to federally owned facilities, such as military bases or prisons, or privately owned or investor-owned wastewater systems. Most of our projects are treatment plant rehabilitation. We also lend for sewer rehab jobs, combined sewer systems, any kind of project that results in maintaining or enhancing water quality, we can fund. Next slide. This one slide goes over the drinking water eligibility. Eligible recipients on the drinking water side are privately owned, including investor-owned community water systems, publicly owned community water systems, such as towns, boroughs, and municipalities, nonprofit, non-community water systems, and we fund any project that helps communities comply with the Safe Drinking Water Act. Again, we don't lend to federally owned systems or for-profit non-community water systems. We have a big pipeline of projects right now for lead service line replacements, projects that address PFAS and emerging contaminants, and as well as treatment plant upgrades and things like that. On the drinking water, we do sometimes have questions of whether we can finance projects that address fire protection. We can't fund those projects that are solely for fire protection, but if it's a ancillary benefit of the project of providing drinking water, then we can finance those portions. When an application comes into the program, we score it and rank it according to ranking systems created for both the clean water and a separate ranking system for the drinking water program. We assign the highest points to projects that address inadequate or untreated discharges to surface water, such as combined sewer overflows or sanitary sewer overflow projects. We also assign points based on the water quality use of the receiving water, impacted waters. We assign points for other various categories, such as community planning activities, if the project addresses climate change and resilience, and whether or not your community meets the affordability criteria to be categorized as a disadvantaged community. On the drinking water side, the highest points go to projects that address public health concerns. Also, lead service line replacement projects get high scoring. And we assign points for climate change resilience and affordability. Next slide. A big component of both programs is the affordability criteria, which establishes whether or not your project qualifies or is eligible for principal forgiveness for a lot of the project categories. And this year, both the clean water and drinking water programs have the same criteria applied to each program. It's basically, if your community has an MHI of 80% of the state's MHI, you would qualify. We also have additional factors. If the unemployment rate in the county of your project is greater than the state's, you could deduct a point from your score. And if your population growth in your community is less than the population growth of the state, you can deduct another point. So if your MHI of your community was 82 and you had high unemployment and low growth, you would still qualify as an affordability community. Communities can also qualify if 35% of the households served by the project qualify as low income or twice the poverty threshold. Next slide. This breaks down what New Jersey is getting from the bipartisan infrastructure law. The bulk of the clean water fund, $72 million, can be used for any eligible clean water project, and 49% of those funds will be given out as principal forgiveness loans. On the drinking water side, the biggest pot of money, it will be going to projects that address lead service lines or lead in drinking water. $49 million. Half of 49% of those funds will be given out as principal forgiveness to communities that meet the affordability criteria. There's also a large pot of $31 million for any eligible drinking water project, and $13 million for projects that address emerging contaminants or PFAS. Since this is a very big issue on the drinking water side this year, we've decided to transfer for the $4 million that was allocated to the clean water program over to the drinking water program for use there. So all these, the new bill funds combined with our normal revolving funds that we get each year and the normal cap grants that we get from the EPA will result in over $900 million available this year for both clean water and drinking water projects. And over the next 5 years, we're going to average approximately $200 million per year in new bill funding that we can use. Okay, and then now we move on to the ARPA funding, American Rescue Plan Act funds from the state. $300 million were allocated in the SFY 23 budget to the DEP to make transformative investments in water infrastructure. So the department is allocating $50 million of those funds to drinking water projects and $250 million to clean water projects. Some of the constraints on the use of the ARPA funds are that they have to be obligated into loan agreements or funding agreements by December 31st, 2024, and all funds have to be dispersed by December 31st, 2026. So used in the water bank, that means you as a project sponsor would have to bid and award your contract before you can enter a funding agreement before December 31st, 2024. And the project has to be completed by December 31st, 2026. The other constraint on the use of ARPA funds is they can generally be used for any eligible clean water state revolving fund project or drinking water state revolving fund project. But there's additional types that are allowed under the law, such as residential wells, which are not normally allowable or eligible under the drinking water program. The DEP has decided to allocate approximately $5 million to address contaminants in private residential wells. And that'll be handled through the site remediation program. Next slide, please. This table just shows you all the categories of projects that can receive principal forgiveness on the clean water side. This year, we'll have $361 million available. The second column shows the amount available for each project category. And then on the last column, it shows you what the maximum cap is for principal forgiveness for each applicant. For our ARPA projects, which are going to be going to combined sewer overflow projects that are on long-term control plans submitted to the department, there's going to be no cap on the project size, and that's where the bulk of our principal forgiveness is going to go to, $248 million. We're also reserving a large amount of principal forgiveness, $36 million, for communities that meet the affordability criteria. And that principal forgiveness can be used for any type of clean water project. If we can go to the next slide. This just points out the breakdown in your loan shares you would get for different project categories. Generally, there's a interest-free portion of the loan and a market rate portion of the loan. The vast majority of projects get 50% interest-free, 50% market rate. If you're in a category that is a high priority and is assigned principal forgiveness, your interest-free portion is 75% and your market rate is 25%. Go to the next slide. This slide breaks down the $113 million in principal forgiveness available for the drinking water SRF. Again, the big bulk of the funds are going to the ARPA category. And on the drinking water side, we've assigned this principal forgiveness to, we're looking for high impact projects that address climate change and resilience, or projects that are designed to comply with multiple maximum contaminant level violations at a treatment facility. And the cap on principal forgiveness for those projects is $20 million. We're also reserving a large amount for lead service line replacement, $25 million. And the cap there is $5 million per applicant. All right, go to the next slide. There's a slight difference between the clean water side and the drinking water side. Drinking water projects are limited to a maximum of $40 million in subsidized loans per project sponsor. Anything over the $40 million can be financed through the water bank, but it would be at the IBank's AAA market rate. So this, again, just breaks down the interest-free portion and market rate portion for various project types or applicant types. As you see on the bottom, investor-owned facilities only get a maximum of 25% interest-free portion, whereas public applicants receive 50-50 as a minimum. All right. All right, I'll just, I'm going to hand this over to Charles Jenkins, my colleague, who will go over the water bank process and steps on how to finance a project.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to briefly summarize the process of project infancy up through long-term financing. So as Paul mentioned earlier, we accept projects on a rolling basis. So at any point that you're contemplating a project, we encourage you to submit it. And the project submission is through the H2 Loans online utility, which is overseen by the New Jersey Infrastructure Bank. I'll drop the link into the chat later for their website. So when you submit a project, we look at it in terms of eligibility and ranking. And at the end of the day, financing is provided if A, you're an eligible sponsor, and B, your project is eligible, and C, all the program requirements are completed. Next slide, please. The so-called WISE Act requires public entities contemplating infrastructure projects to at least come in and get a financial analysis from the infrastructure bank. So this is an online utility also overseen by the IBank, and there's the web link to access it. So very simply put, it provides a comparison of water bank financing versus conventional financing. Next slide, please. So the water bank process, step one, as I've said, is you create your project. So you do your homework to plan what project you need, to get the basics put into place, to get that project submitted into H2 Loans under step two. DEP will rank it. That's typically when we have a project kickoff meeting with project sponsors to set the stage for expectations and timelines. Step three, the letter of intent. This is also through H2 Loans. This includes the project planning report, so environmental impacts, preliminary engineering, description of permitting, anticipated fees as a result of the project, etc. And at the end of that planning process, the department issues what is known as an environmental decision document that is analogous to the federal government's National Environmental Policy Act review process. Next. The next step after the project planning and environmental review is submission of the loan application, again, online. Upload of the engineering and design specs. So those would be your proposed contract documents. Those are reviewed for compliance with state, federal, and loan program requirements. One of the big state requirements is compliance with local public contracts law, which I suspect most people on this webinar are somewhat familiar with. Professional services agreements. So these are agreements to both develop the project and then to also oversee project construction. Any required permits and approvals are sorted through and obtained at this time. And the program requires compliance with socially and economically disadvantaged participation requirements. This is a 10% goal, overall project cost based. So there are a variety of ways to comply with that. A selected contractor may wholly meet the SED requirements and you'd have 100%, or maybe you would have an SED firm assisting with planning and design or construction oversight. So there are many ways to achieve that overall 10% goal. Step 6 is submission of any revisions and final review. At that point, the department would authorize you to go out to bid. Step 7 is, as a result of the bidding process, you receive bids, you evaluate them, you select an apparent low bidder. The department also authorizes the award of the contract. Next, please. So here's kind of beginning to end, just laid out in sequence. Project eligibility determination, ranking, the environmental decision, the authorization to advertise, sponsor procurement activities, the department's authorization to award and certification to the IBank. So one thing I want to point out here is when the DEP certifies a construction contract to the infrastructure bank, that is when a final determination on principal forgiveness is made. Next step is short-term loan award to allow you to cover your costs during construction. When construction is completed, the short-term loan is rolled over into a long-term loan. And then at the end of 1 year, there is a certification by your professional engineer that everything is operating and performing as designed. This is just a snapshot of what the priority list looks like. So that very first step of getting a project in and being put on the priority list is very important. We cannot close on a short-term loan with you unless you have a project on the project priority list. Next. So this is always important consideration for all involved. And obviously project timelines are going to vary depending on the complexity of a project. So if you come into us for a street sweeper, you may see a 2 to 4 month timeline. If you are considering a treatment capacity upgrade at a wastewater facility, that may put you at the longer end of this timeline. So years 1 to 3, this is usually on your side before you come into us, all the efforts that are needed for you to get your project submitted to the program. And I'll just wait for the slideshow to catch up. Yes, thank you. This 2 to 6 month period is more preliminary work. That's where the DEP and the IBank would start working with you on the project review processes to comply with the loan application requirements. So again, highly variable depending on the project. Same with the final design. Certain permits may require public comment periods. Depending on the complexity of your project, the environmental decision that we oversee may require a public hearing and a public comment period, each of 30 days. So that's why you see this variance in the timeline. We usually estimate about 2 months for contract procurement. So the standard is usually 30 days for the bidding, and then another 30 days for you to evaluate the bids, get the information into us, and for us to make that authorization to award. And then the construction period, It can be almost immediate if it's procurement of a piece of equipment. 3 years is the outside limit under the short-term loan provisions for your construction period. So this is where applicants sometimes consider phasing of project components. At the end of the day, each component has to be independently operable. But for instance, if you were looking at system-wide lead service line replacements, you may not be able to do the whole system in 3 years. So you would chop that into manageable pieces that you could meet that 3-year outer limit timeline. Next slide, please. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Kristen Tedesco to cover the technical assistance.
All right, good morning. So before we conclude this presentation, I'm going to discuss just a couple slides on the technical assistance that will be available from the department. So under the funds that we've received from BIL, the states have the ability to utilize specific funds for what we call non-project set-asides. They can be used for lots of program implementation tasks, and that includes some planning and design tasks. DEP is going to be using these funds towards a technical assistance program that we've summarized briefly here. It will utilize contracts with third-party technical assistance providers, and they'll provide assistance directly to facilities. So we'll be targeting specifically disadvantaged communities, but others that meet some of the criteria that's specified on this slide. So those that have not utilized SRF in the past, just based on a lack of familiarity navigating the application process. Maybe these systems don't have technical, financial, managerial support or community support to implement some of these capital improvement projects, or those that just don't know what they need. They have the inability to provide a full assessment of their needs. Next slide. So this just outlines a few of the types of technical assistance that we will be offering. You see their engineering services, so that's more the planning and design costs. Program navigation, again, for those that have needs regarding how to fill out the applications or how to navigate their way through all the various program requirements. Financial and needs assessments, that's understanding your fiscal needs for your system and how to actually pay for these capital improvements. And then the last category you see there is community engagement. So that's solicitation and outreach to stakeholders, especially to generate interest. And that's even more important now with some of the lead service line replacement requirements, and really engaging the community to get them to understand why these projects are important for the protection of public health in that regard. So examples of some of the types of technical assistance here. On the drinking water side, we intend to use the third-party providers to assess needs and identify projects for funding in categories such as lead service line inventories, updating lead service line replacement plans, and hopefully moving them forward to a viable lead service line replacement project. TMF evaluations, and also engineering assistance under drinking water for the planning and design of specific projects. We'll also be offering a contract for community outreach and engagement assistance. So that would encourage program participation. It would include outreach materials, roadblocks, and just direct community advocacy in that regard. And then on the clean water side, there'll be technical assistance that NJDEP will be providing with iBank assistance and also EPA funding. And that'll be to assist disadvantaged communities with things such as system assessments, fiscal assessments, public outreach, and financing acquisitions. We also will be utilizing some of our NJDEP experienced staff, and they'll provide what we call water program navigation assistance. So they'll be helping these systems with the application process and just other program requirements to move them through construction. Next slide. So then I did not cover this in detail today, but we are holding a webinar next week, October 6th, that invitations, I believe, have gone out or are going out today for. This will cover all of these different types of assistance, in further detail for anyone who is interested. We're encouraging anybody that may be interested, to coordinate with your public works superintendent or whomever it may be to kind of determine needs. And then identify, do you have projects that meet the criteria that we've outlined here today and that cover some of these, high priority capital improvement needs. There's also a technical assistance form that will be available online either later today or early tomorrow morning. So by the end of the week. And so if you have questions or think you might be interested in technical assistance, you can fill out this form and just specifically state, I think my utility is interested in lead service line replacement assistance, and somebody from the DEP will follow up in that regard. And then the last resort is just to reach out to us and request a meeting. Often once projects are submitted through our application system, we do a lot of pre-application meetings or meetings just to cover the basic program requirements. So that still is an option that's available. And then next. I think that concludes what DEP had to talk to about today. So
hello. Thank you, Kristen. And so now we will pull from the chat to begin our Q&A. And I would first like to clarify that these slides will be sent around today to the attendees of this meeting. Now, first from the chat, if we've already applied for a water bank loan, can it be converted even partially to become eligible for a grant?
That's a good question. If you already have an application in the system and a project progressing, it will automatically be considered for this new funding, the bill funding and principal forgiveness. If a portion of your project is under construction and you have additional operable segments which can operate independently on their own and are yet to be bid, those additional operable segments will also be considered for principal forgiveness funding.
Thank you. Now, a lot of our pre-submitted questions were touched on in the panel. Like, will small towns be considered? Yes. Can funds be used for flood hazard and dam rehabilitation studies and/or dam rehabilitation construction?
Generally, oh, you want to go take this, Charles? I think you're on mute, Charles.
So in general, resilience measures or measures to control flooding that affects infrastructure are eligible under the program. Whole-scale flood control projects are not eligible through the program. So we need to see that connection with water quality and with other infrastructure in the project area.
Thank you. We received a question on whether there is guidance on whether applications can be expedited for approval. And that was the extent of the question.
So I can just answer that in a somewhat general way. That's why we encourage applicants to request a pre-planning meeting after they submit a project. That would be the appropriate time to discuss the schedule. We understand there's sometimes urgencies related to other work going on in the proposed project area, or the condition of the existing infrastructure or the existing environmental problem is severe and needs immediate attention. So in those cases, we try to move those projects to the top of the stack as far as we are able.
Thank you. Would our water meter upgrades covered interconnection coverage? Is interconnection covered? A lot of questions about PFAS and PFOA, as was indicated in the slides. Okay, we have what needs to be done prior to a pre-planning meeting?
So ideally, we would like an entity to create a project in H2 loans so that we are able to make that initial eligibility determination and to rank the project. And then that gives us that very basic information, kind of, sets off any indicators of whether permitting is required or whether there'll be other issues specific to that project that we need to focus on. So there is a button in H2 loans when an applicant creates a project that will request that meeting automatically, and infrastructure bank staff then take the steps to schedule the meetings.
Thank you. I am scrolling for more. I'm seeing questions about lead service lines. We had several inquiries about whether there is money for lead service line replacement. Now, could we expand on the lead service line replacement aspect?
Yes, so we do have money for lead service line replacement under our current intended use plan. It's directed at systems that meet the affordability criteria as outlined in our intended use plan. It is for full lead line replacements, which is what is required under the new legislation requiring the replacement of all lead lines within 10 years. So by full replacement, you're removing all of the lead from the service line, both the water system owned portion and the homeowner owned portion. I would just encourage, Elena of my staff is also on this call, and I can certainly put our emails in the chat, but if you also have specific questions on lead line replacements in accordance with that new New Jersey legislation, we can answer them regarding your specific projects. But there is money. We recognize that it's, not enough maybe this year to replace lead lines like across the state, which is, a very big need. But there's additional money coming, and we are trying to see what other projects might be on the horizon. So I'll put our contact information in the chat.
Thank you, Kristen. I'm seeing no other questions in the chat. So Assistant Commissioner, I'd like to turn it over to you for any closing remarks.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear
Okay.
you.
I know you can't see me now. I'm not quite sure what's going on with my new monitor, but I apologize for all the technical difficulties I had today. But I just want to thank you all for attending. I know this is a lot of material, especially if it's the first time you're being exposed to it. I think if you take it back, read it over, talk to your public works directors, attend the meeting next week on the technical assistance if you're able to, but that will also be recorded and made available. And you would go to the department's water infrastructure investment plan website. We can drop the link in the chat if it's not in there already. There's a lot of materials on that. It has the intended use plans for both clean water and drinking water, and you can read more details about the prioritization that we use. And I think also we are, really interested in hearing from you as far as, the types of technical assistance you might need. Take Charles and Paul up on their offer to come in for a pre-application meeting is really helpful. You saw there are a bunch of steps that you have to walk through to be able to, end up with a long-term loan at the end of the day. So you just want to make sure that you're submitting documents that you're supposed to on time, and you're answering requests for additional information. And together, if we work together as a team, we should be able to make really good use of this incredible opportunity with this enhanced financial resources that we have under the bill and the ARPA funds as well. Again, thank you for coming, and we hope to hear from you soon.
Thanks all. Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks.